Hi everybody, Deb Tucker here from Studio 180 Design, and I am thrilled to finally be able to share with you our new tool releases that we call First Choice. And these tools are actually rulers. And we have two of them. One measures 4 inches by 14 inches, and the second one measures 7 inches by 13 inches. Now let's take a few minutes and take a close-up look at these tools. Because they're rulers, they're going to have those horizontal and vertical lines, and they're easily identifiable for the whole inch, the half inch, the quarter inch, and the 1/8 inch markings. We also have diagonal lines, and I'll talk to you about that in just a few minutes. But what you should notice on the tools is the lines are as fine as we could make them. And the finer the lines, the better your precision when you're constructing your quilts. Now, one thing I also want you to notice is that there is not a ½ inch added edge to any of the sides of these tools. So there's going to be no more cutting the wrong size when you're using the wrong side of the ruler. Everything's measured in whole inches from the edges. Now, if you take a look at one of the long edges of the tool, you're going to see that there's a dedicated 1/4 inch line. And that line you can use for all kinds of different things. I use it to check a 1/4 inch. I use it to measure a 1/4 inch. I use it to trim a 1/4 inch. I also use it to mark a 1/4 inch, especially when I'm dealing with those bigger squares that are going to become my half square triangles. The 14 inch is longer than a Quilter's Magic Wand, so that you can now either mark a center line if you want to stitch from a line, or you can mark using the 1/4 inch line, the 2 diagonal lines to stitch on a line. And it's also long enough to trim those larger squares apart as well. Now let's take a look at those diagonal lines. They're using the angles that we as quilters use most often in our quilt construction. 30 degrees, 45 degrees, and 60 degrees. And we have those diagonals radiating out in 4 different directions from about the midpoint of the long edges of the tools. And we have them all crisscrossing at a convergence point. But those points are different from one side of the tool to the other. Now, if you look at the left-hand edge, you'll see that those broken lines meet or converge right at the edge of the tool. And those we call our marking lines, because more often than not, you're going to be using a pencil to mark a line against the edge using one or more of those diagonal lines. Looking across the ruler, you're going to see that those solid diagonals meet or converge not at the edge of the tool, but at a point a 1/4 inch in from the edge. And we call those the cutting lines, because more often than not, you're going to be using those guidelines along with a rotary cutter to preserve your 1/4 inch when you're trimming things using the different angles that are involved. Now let's take a look at these First Choice rulers in action. If you see here these shapes, I love playing with these. They're the shaded 4 patch, the shaded 9 patch, the triangle pizzazz, and the flock of birds. If you've made any of these with our efficient construction technique, you know that what we do is we put a piece rectangle on top of an unpieced rectangle, and then we draw diagonal lines at a 45-degree through seam intersections. We get more questions on how do you draw, how do I set up my tool for that 45 degrees? Well, with the First Choice tools, this job is now a hiccup. All you need to do is find those broken diagonal lines, the marking lines, line those 45-degree lines up onto the seams that are already sewn, and just like that, they're properly arranged for you to quickly and easily mark the lines that will be your sewing lines. And after you stitch on those lines, you can turn your First Choice tool around. You can put that 1/4 inch line on there and trim a very accurate 1/4 inch away from the seam that you've just sewn. You can see that same thing happening with the shaded 9 patch. The 2 45 degrees are on previously sewn seams. Easy to see, easy to mark. And if you're doing triangle pizzazz, you're not using 2 45 degrees, you're using 1 45 degree and 1 crosshair to do the same thing, to quickly position the ruler to mark those sewing lines that are necessary. And of course, it's not only 45 degrees, you can also do these same processes with 60 degrees by placing those guidelines on seam lines and marking the future sewing lines. It's quick and easy, and anytime you need to trim that 1/4 inch, you can reverse the tool, set up that guideline onto the seam line that you've just sewn, and then trim it an accurate 1/4 inch away. Now, some of the other things that I do when I make my wedge stars, I need to cut diamonds, and I need to cut them at 45 degrees. Lining up the 45-degree line makes it quick and easy to subcut those diamonds. I also use it with my Star 60 tool, lining up the 60-degree line to subcut diamonds. When I'm making my Lemoyne stars, I'm layering my strip sets, subcutting those at 45-degree angle. There again, place the guideline on a seam line or on the fabric edge, and you're off and running to getting a nice subcut in that direction. But when you make that second cut on the Lemoyne star, I put those 45-degree guideline on the edge, and I'm off and running to quick and easy construction success. Now, the other day I was making this block. I had 4 patches set on point, and I surrounded it with oversized triangles. And that means that I need to square up those edges. The first choice ruler is the perfect choice, and it allows me to line up the 45-degree lines on the sewn seam. And now I'm using the cutting lines here that are a 1/4 inch in from the edge, allowing me to trim that edge straight, nice and true, but leaving that 1/4 inch that I need for my future construction. Now you can begin to see why those first choice tools are my absolute go-to rulers every time I need them for my quilt construction. And rest assured, if you happen to be left-handed, the orientation and arrangement of those diagonal lines are perfectly suited for you to be able to get the same results as a left-hand cutter and marker as I do as a right-hander. So don't wait. Rush right over to your quilt shop, get both of them, the 4x14 and the 7x13, and start using them for your quilt construction, and send us some photos. Let us see how things you discover about these new tools in your quilt construction processes. Till then, take care and have fun, everybody.